All right, our third strategy is a very, very specific one. It's one of those ones where like you'll know it when you see it. Um, Third strategy is to get a common denominator. When do you do that? Well, you get a common denominator when you're adding or subtracting fractions. Okay, so we'll do one example here, and then we'll do another one on that last video where I take and just do a whole bunch of the examples from the back of the packet. So this one, you might look at it right away and be like, wait, how common denominator, there's no fractions there. Okay? But just take and use the strategies you have so far. Okay, so we have this, there's nothing I can factor out of it because it doesn't have anything in common and it's not like a unfoiling situation. Okay, so the other thing I can do, my first strategy, substitute in sines and cosines everywhere. Because this is already sine, this is already cosine. We can turn this into sines and cosines, and hopefully maybe something cancels here. That's kind of actually our actual goal at the beginning, even if it doesn't work. So we do that. Okay, we're going to take that out. So we'll keep everything else. So sine x plus cosine x. Cotangent, I can replace with cosine over sine. So I'm going to replace cotangent with cosine over sine. And again, this is the example for the third strategy in that little packet. Okay, so unfortunately, this time nothing canceled here. Like if I clean this up one more step, this is cosine times cosine on the top, which is cosine squared. And on the bottom, I have sine. Okay, so this is cosine squared over sine. Okay, and I look at what I have here. Resist the urge to try to cancel these out because this is not a multiplication problem. Okay, so these have nothing to do with each other at the moment. These aren't going to be combined into one fraction without first getting a common denominator. Okay, so when I'm looking at this, in order to add this to this, because it is adding, not multiplying, okay, so this is where this comes in. We're adding two fractions, even if they don't look like fractions yet. I can put this side over 1. Okay, and I want a common denominator. Now, to get a common denominator is pretty easy here because the only denominator I have is a sine. Okay, so to make a common denominator, multiply this guy by sine. Okay, so if I multiply the bottom by sine, I'm going to have sine x down here. If I multiply the top by sine, sine times another sine would just be sine squared. It works just like an x. Okay. And now I have that common denominator. I can add these two together. Okay, so on top, I'm going to have sine squared plus cosine squared over my common denominator, which is sine of x. Okay. And it might look like we haven't gotten very far yet. And it might look like, well, where do I go from here? Don't separate it out and start trying to cancel stuff. Notice on the top, sine squared plus cosine squared. Okay. If I have a couple of squareds, which ones of these identities should it make me think of? Well, when I have a couple of squareds, I should be thinking of the Pythagorean ones. Okay. And so look for the one that has sine squared and cosine squared. That is the top one right here. Literally, sine squared plus cosine squared just equals 1. Okay, so in this formula right now, I can replace sine squared plus cosine squared with just a 1. So I took this whole thing out and replaced it with something that's equal to. And then the bottom didn't change. The bottom's still there. So I've got it down to one thing. If I can avoid having it be a fraction, that's great too. So we look at this and say, okay, well, 1 over sine also looks familiar. Okay, look over at your kind of your list of possible things you can use. Where do you see 1 over sine? Well, that's a reciprocal. 1 over sine is just cosecant. Okay, so I can just say, okay, well, that's just cosecant of x. Again, once you've done a little bit of this, it's kind of a neat process. It's just a little step by step. How do I keep making it better? Keep making it better. Sometimes it doesn't seem like you're making it better along the way. Like sometimes maybe things look a little more complicated for a moment or two, but you just trust it as long as you're using things appropriately that you're going to get to where you need to get to. So that's getting a common denominator.